much, and thank you to all of you for joining. I know in the past we've come to the NASAP meeting and talk about Connecticut's efforts. So thank you, Hetty and Sue, for allowing us this opportunity to talk about our COVID response around attendance. And thank you, your mentor appreciated the work that we're doing here. But to your point, Hetty, we do that with a team here in Connecticut. However, and for our state folks who are on the phone or on the call, I would just say so critically important to have good leadership within agencies. To Hetty's point, that is what has caused us to kind of stay steady in the work that we're doing over the many years, a decade of working together, and attendance work's been there with us. So thank you so much for that. So next slide, I think Sue may be advancing the slide for us. So today, I'm here with you facilitating, but with an awesome team. We have Deputy Commissioner Desi Naismith, which ensures that the entire agency now is working together on this effort. Our Chief Performance Officer, Ajit Gopalakrishnan, and you've probably seen Ajit making the circuit, talking about the work that we're pioneering here in Connecticut. And Kari Sullivan Custer, I'm getting used to Kari's new name added at the end, who is our state attendance lead. And for those of you who've heard me speak before, she is our boots on the ground and keeps everything grounded and running. And what I would say, what you see from this team demonstrates an agency-wide effort to ensure that students are attending, regardless of their learning model, and engaged in learning. And so we hope to share that with you today. Next slide. So this is our outline of what we will share with you with the time that we have. We'll give you some Connecticut context, and then we'll just go through the COVID response and where we are, defining and tracking attendance, the data analysis that's going on, the support work that's happening, and really accelerating learning and achieving equity, which ultimately is our goal. And again, we'll work through that and share our background with you. So next slide. In all these calls, we always like to start off with a snapshot of Connecticut. So first, in Connecticut, we have the distinct privilege of serving, as you can see, 527,000 plus kids. I call them a beautifully diverse student body, as you can see, representing racial, ethnic, linguistic diversity with varying abilities. And our students are served by over 50,000 certified educators. And as Hetty mentioned, we've had over a decade of intentional and focused efforts on improving attendance, as evidenced by a chronic absence definition in statute and guidelines, which were promulgated by not only our department, but our State Board of Education. We have Connecticut in statute, the requirement of district and chronic absence attendance teams in districts based on certain thresholds of chronic absence. In our accountability system, chronic absence was a part of state accountability pre-ESSA, that was in 2014-15, that was there. And our targeted supports to districts with high levels of chronic absence and data-informed target supports for student population groups, example, students with disabilities and students experiencing homelessness. And so our COVID response, we've built upon that infrastructure. And my colleague, Desi, will now share with you another key aspect of our COVID response. Desi?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Charlene. One of the most important aspects is, as we've looked at this and dealt with this in the pandemic over the last 10, 11 months, has been the ability to start to address the digital divide. As we look at things like participation, attendance, and the things that Charlene mentioned, we needed to really shore up the infrastructure to get students and families the technology that they needed to be able to participate in school on a regular basis. And so we spent a good deal of time preparing and working and braiding different funding streams as a state to be able to provide upwards of 142,000 devices. We did a survey last spring to identify what the need is. We refined that over the summer, and then we worked to braid funds to procure the devices that we need. In addition to that, we also put money towards hotspots and broadband vouchers for families that needed it. Because if we're talking about things like attendance and participation in school, we needed to start with getting the infrastructure there for our students and families. Charlene?
All right, thank you, Desi. So hopefully that sets the stage for us, for you in going forward in terms of where we started, where we are. And now Ajit will take us to data collection, monitoring, and reporting.
Thanks. Thanks, Charlene. Thanks, Desi. I put a link in the chat for the press release from the governor in December about our Everybody Learns initiative and the device connectivity work that Desi referenced. So that's in there. Could someone stop sharing so I could pull up my screen? I'm not sure who's sharing. Okay, great. Thank you. Let's see if this works. Thumbs up if you could see it. Okay, good, great. So I'm going to start with the basics, which is the definition and the guidance around attendance. As Charlene mentioned, we've been collecting attendance data and reporting chronic absence actually since data year 2011-12, and that became part of formal accountability starting with 14-15 school year data. Our definition of attendance that's on the screen here, and I'll post these links in the chat as well, speaks to attendance being the kid present in his or her assigned school for at least half the regular school day. And that is something that's held true from the very beginning. And so this guidance that you're looking at is actually part of our reporting system for student attendance. It's part of the public school information system. And it goes into a lot of different nuances about how to handle basic reporting. How do you handle disciplinary absences? What exactly is half a day mean? How do you handle early dismissal days? How do you handle extended family vacations? And we've had debates and fights with our superintendents about these kinds of topics. Half a day kindergarten, how do you handle that? Homebound students, etc. So I just want to just make the point that this notion of giving guidance on attendance data and collecting data on attendance has been there for a very long time in the state of Connecticut, and that maturity actually helps us with some of the work that we're doing now. The second thing I want to mention is this COVID time frame and this notion of remote attendance. Now, obviously, that is the new construct that we have created during this COVID timeframe. And we went back and forth with districts to create this guidance. And it's basically a combination of, basically what we're saying is that if the time that the student spends with virtual classes that are synchronous, meetings, perhaps you track their time in systems like Edgenuity or Khan Academy or things like that, or you're looking sort of asynchronous assignment submission completion. So if you put all these four together, and if that equals at least half a day, then the student on that remote day can be considered remote present. So we stuck to the half a day definition even for remote attendance, and we were able to come up with a system that, or at least this basic framework. But it's not just this basic guidance. What we learned very quickly is, in addition to that guidance, we had to deal with a whole bunch of questions that come. For example, is synchronous classroom presence required? We know more of our schools are doing synchronous instruction in the fall this year than compared to the March through June timeframe of last year, because they've learned that synchronous really engages students, but is it required? So we basically got to the stance that says no, because there are, for some students, that just doesn't work. And you cannot require synchronous participation. Students should be allowed to submit asynchronous work and be able to count as present. Do you need all four approaches every day? No. You could be synchronous and not have any asynchronous work. That's okay. It's just that the combination has to equal half a day. And then this is another contentious one. Can students who otherwise would have attended in person, can they suddenly for that one day switch and be remote? And we've had to say yes, but within reason, because you don't want students to abuse that type of flexibility. So, we're trying to balance the equity issues, the needs of our students, with the reality of running schools and districts, and we keep sort of amending and adding to this guidance. We have dealt with situations where students end up being remote. When they're remote, they end up being out of state, in some cases out of country for a period of time, and then they're coming back. Can they still be present? And we've again had to encourage reliance in terms of favoring the student. But I'm just giving you examples of things that we've had to deal with this guidance. So with this notion of remote attendance. The third piece that I want to show is that we put out this guidance for remote attendance. Clearly, students could be in person or remote. Combination of that really is hybrid. But we didn't stop there. We said, okay, we have to now collect data that actually shows how our students are doing during the year. We can't wait, as we usually do, till the end of the year to know how our kids are doing. Our State Board of Education, in its flexibility, if you will, to allow for remote days to count as school days, basically expected the State Department of Education to know how kids are doing during the year. So we set up this collection. This is a monthly collection where districts have to give us student level attendance that's disaggregated for that month by in-person days and remote days. So if a kid who is an in-person kid full-time ends up quarantining for 2 weeks because of exposure or sickness themselves, then the kid may be an in-person kid, but for those 14 days or 10 school days or whatever, they're remote. So this allows for student level sort of tracking of how many days is a kid in person, how many days is a kid remote. And because it's student level, we've been able to attach it to our demographics. We get all sorts of breakouts. And so in terms of reporting, this is the last piece that I'll share, is that we have been publishing these data for all our school districts in a monthly format, but really updating it to reflect year-to-date attendance. So for example, this is a map of Connecticut that shows the attendance rates for our high needs students. And so we're able to update it for the 2021 school year, probably a couple of weeks after the month ends. Once we've collected the data and analyzed it, we can then show where our high needs students have lower attendance this year. And that's one way in which our student supports and turnaround offices are able to help districts. Plus, we've been reporting these data, attendance by student group and district. So district level by student group, attendance by school, attendance rates by high needs category and by grade, and chronic absence by district, et cetera. We're putting out all these sort of detailed files that I know the folks who are going to talk about the supports, these are the documents they use as part of a community of practice work or for individualized district level support. And at a very high level, what have we learned? We are learning that about 18% of our students from the start of the year have been fully remote, never had a day of membership in person in school. Another 18% have had fewer than 25% of their days be in person. So they're really mostly remote. But a good chunk of the kids are hybrid, where between 25 and 75% of their days are in person. So it's kind of that middle bucket. And as every month goes by, this bar is increasing. And few of our students have been fully in person every day of the school year. And that's understandable because schools might close for in-person instruction because they don't have staff or from exposure. We've also learned that our students with needs, our most vulnerable student populations, tend to be fully remote at a greater rate. We're seeing that as well. We also know that as of now, year-to-date, as of December attendance, that our attendance on remote days is actually lower than our attendance on in-person days for all students groups. And then we're also seeing that we started tracking chronic absence as we got more months of attendance. We're able to see that our chronic absence rates, which is really that 10% threshold, the chronic absence rates are substantially higher this year for all student groups. That even for students who are not eligible for any meals, those students are also showing higher chronic absenteeism rates. And to some degree, that's driven by these, by the remote days. So just one last point, we also have been collecting learning model data, which is really just telling us what model the district is offering by grade. We've been collecting that since September, since really the first week of school. And this chart basically shows the percent of our districts that are operating predominantly in a in-person learning model. We started out slow. People were putting their toe in the water. People got comfortable. We were at the peak here. Then there was some case increases. We kind of declined a bit. Then the holidays came. There was some remote activity. And we seem to be inching back up to having more of our districts offering in-person instruction. And there's a map for the school learning models as well that lets you kind of just see what each district is doing, and there are data files that go with it. The same page also has the health indicators that we work with our DPH folks they update this on a weekly basis as well. That gives us what the positivity rate is and number of cases per 100,000 in each of our counties. So the rates are obviously higher now, but I think districts have been judicious and very careful about how they're doing in-person instruction. And Charlene and folks, I mean, there's a yeoman amount of work that's been done with that guidance. That's a 3-hour separate presentation, I think. So I think that takes care of my part. I'll stop sharing and let folks get back. Thank you.
Sure, and I think there's lots of questions that we want to talk about, and we could do this again. As you see from what Ajit said and Ajit's slide, it is a comprehensive effort, and I'm proud of those charts and graphs make it to our governor's press conference. So he's talking about the importance of attendance and engagement, and we're talking about how the learning models are influencing and impacting that. So it truly is a statewide effort on addressing this. Now, I think folks we want to talk to you about supports, but someone I think is asking that there's some questions specifically for Ajit, and maybe we'll try to manage that and adjust what we're going to say afterwards. How's that, Sue?
And if we need to, Charlene, I think we can make some of the other parts of the webinar go, or our NASAT meeting go a little bit shorter, but 2 questions. One might be easy. Ajit, do districts all have to provide a remote model?
Districts are, per our guidance, they are required to allow parents to opt into full-time remote instruction if they so choose, for whatever reason the parent might have. So just by that very fact, it expects the district to have a remote offering.
Second question, how are you helping districts to have clean quality data?
Yeah, I saw the dirty data question. That is an ongoing battle, Cecilia. I think in general, because of our long history of reporting chronic absence and paying attention to attendance data, our data are generally strong. So we've dealt with some of the more basic things like how to take attendance in student information systems, things like that. The challenge this year is the new construct of remote attendance. It really makes a difference in terms of who is taking attendance. In the old days, it might have been the guidance secretary in the entryway of a building, but now it's actually teachers having to make that determination. So I would say that it is an ongoing work in progress. Anytime anybody brings any issues of concern with this, we have a direct intervention with the district and try to work through those issues. And I'm not going to pretend that the data are perfect and beautiful and the cleanest data we've ever collected, but we have confidence in them because we've done the work over the years. And as we work with the districts, we continue to refine our guidance. And some of the guidance elements have been, and the FAQs that I shared came from that perspective. But that is ongoing work that happens. We compared this year to last year just to get a sense of if there's anomalies, missing data, we check with districts. So for this monthly collection, it's a huge army. Well, not a huge army, actually. A few people who are doing an army's worth of work every week, every month to collect the data, check it, go back to districts, get cleaner submissions, and then before we release. So it's an ongoing battle. question also Cecilia had about how learning models are working. It's premature to sort of speak to that at this point. All we can say is that attendance on remote days is slightly lower than attendance on in-person days for all student groups. Roughly a day a month is kind of what we're seeing of absence, a day more a month of absence. That's kind of what we're seeing. We have not been collecting academic performance on this through COVID, if you will. Our focus and our message from day one has been that in this year, in any year, but particularly this year, the focus during the year should be on assessments that help instruction, not assessments that just give you scores. And by this, I'm referring to like off-the-shelf benchmark assessments. That's not the value proposition. The value proposition is in more diagnostic, more actionable, fine-grained, small-scale assessments. But we've also held to the position that it's important this year more than ever to try to administer our state assessments at the end of this year, so we know how our students are doing, which will allow us to do some of this academic performance by learning model and things like that across grade levels, but also not to hold schools and districts accountable for the outcomes from this data. This is not the year to do big A accountability. This is the year to do the kinds of stuff we've shared already around attendance, and even when we are able to do the state assessment, to actually use it for informational purposes, for discussion, for learning, and how to make things better for students.
I'll just add to that as well. As you can see, and if you hear from state agencies, it is a small army, but I would say they're aligned and coordinated. So when Kari is doing community of practice and learning what the turbulence may be about data collection and all that, it makes its way back to our performance folks, and it makes its way into Desi and myself, the two deputy commissioners, meeting with our superintendents directly and having conversations to say, let's problem solve what's going on around attendance. Governor's office on that call, we're saying, how do we support you, district, superintendent? So this is how it's all working as a system of support for all of us together. So performance is talking to program, and that's what we're demonstrating here. It's an all-out effort, internal and external, and that's what the data are allowing us to do as we're doing this work.
Charlene, before we move on, could you just give a little context around the issue of administering an assessment in this school year, and what are the challenges that face you, and see whether it's true for, I'm just wondering whether this question about whether you can do an assessment this year is also facing other states, and this might be an opportunity to raise that issue up.
Correct, and I know Ajit and Desi will jump in as well, but I'm sure you're all having the question as to assess or not to assess. That is the question, and we know from the U.S. Department of Education that we have the waiver for the accountability waiver, so to disentangle the assessment from accountability, but there's yet no waiver from doing the assessments, right? So that's where we are. We already know though that stakeholders are already saying it's a pandemic year, kids are already traumatized, teachers are concerned about, somehow this is a way to show their worth or work, and that we shouldn't. Superintendents are concerned. So all those are the kinds of things that we are struggling with right now. And I know Ajit, Desi's probably going to jump in. So it really is very important for us to be thinking about. We believe we need to know exactly how the pandemic has impacted learning, and to be able to learn how are kids doing with the different learning models, because this may not end soon, right? Don't we want to know? But we recognize that these are challenges. And from an equity standpoint, I really do believe we need to know. But I know states right now are in the throes of this. And for those of you that don't know, our Commissioner of Education is the Secretary of Education designee. And I know they've got major, decisions that they have to make around this that's going to impact the entire country. So we'll kind of wait and see. Desi, I'm sure you wanted to jump in here too.
Yeah, I think, Charlene, you really covered the points here. I think when we talk about assessment, it's important to acknowledge, one, we didn't assess last year. Two, when we talk beyond just districts and teachers, I think it's important that our parents and our families and our communities and our stakeholders know where our kids are. And one way to be able to gauge that is through the state assessment. And to Charlene's earlier point, or Ajita, I don't remember who made the point, but there's a reason we're applying for that waiver to decouple the accountability piece from the assessment. And we've also messaged to the field, and this is in large part thanks to Ajit and his team, we've messaged to the field, to our superintendents, who I think are one of the most concerned groups we have, that we're not going to treat this like we've treated releasing assessment results in the past. This needs to look different, and we've committed to working with them around what that looks like so that this doesn't get spun in a punitive way for our superintendents in our districts. And so we've been very vocal about that. And we've also been very vocal about why we feel strongly about the need to assess our kids and know what the effects are right now of this pandemic on them academically.
Thank you so much. And I will say this also gets connected back to Cecilia's question about what do we know about modes of instruction? If we don't have assessment, it's going to be hard to say, other than did they keep showing up? And I also think it ends up in questions about whether we can look at how chronic absence affects learning during a pandemic year. With that, we will turn it back to Connecticut to talk about the supports that they're putting in place. Thank you so much for taking these questions.
No, thank you. Perfect. And you can move to the next slide, Sue. And so what, right? We've got all this data, we're collecting, we have information. We really believe in our state is an integrated approach for student wellness that does include, as you can see here, attendance and engagement. We're addressing school discipline, family engagement as a big part of that, Kari, having the webinars directly with families. Of course, the issue of social emotional learning and wellness, how we support our educators as they're supporting our students, the issue of behavioral health, mental health, trauma, and there's a lot we can talk about, the initiatives that we're engaging around that, including other state agencies at the table with us, and certainly curriculum instruction. And we have equity here that permeates, right, everything that it is that we're doing. And so I just really wanted you to see that it's not a one-off, let's just address attendance and engagement. It has to be a part of this integrated approach that we're using, and that's a core piece of the supports that we're providing. Desi, next
slide, please. So one of the things that we built last spring was the CT Learning Hub. We wanted to do a couple of things. One, we wanted to have sort of a one-stop shop for not only our educators, but our families, our community, and our students. And so this is the hub that we built, and you can see here the different sections that reside in here. And what's significant about this is we've cultivated a number of relationships over the past year and frankly beyond a year, so that we could have supports within the hub that act as a supplement. This is not designed to replace a district's curriculum. This is not designed to replace a teacher's lesson plans. This is designed to be a resource for any student, parent, educator, superintendent in Connecticut that can go on here and get resources that are free. And I emphasize the free part because we wanted to make this something that was equitable across the board, that everybody had access to, no matter what district you're in, no matter what school you're in. So in here, we've have resources that we've cultivated with our local public access folks at the state level, who actually run programming statewide during student vacation. So we actually had summer programming running on the Connecticut Public Access Channel for kids that could participate. We did the same thing again for Christmas break. We've got resources in here from partners at Scholastic, Wide Open Schools, Greg Tang Math. I mean, a lot of extra supplemental supports that we're providing and that we push out. One of the other things I just want to also mention as part of this hub, we've also set up a system in the academic office where we're doing what's called pop-up PD. So a district will let us know, hey, we're really struggling with this one thing. We will put together a professional development that lasts about 15, 20 minutes, and almost like a small bites of information that districts can join those pop-up PDs and be a part of that. So a lot going on the academic side around supports and equity as well. Charlene?
And thank you, Desi, but I hope you're getting the picture of how all of this really works together when we talk about student attendance and engagement. It's the process that, yes, we have the data and all of that, but it is part of a larger system of attendance and engagement. And I'm going to let you hear Kari's voice because, again, we're using the data and we're really saying this is data-informed supports. In the focus areas that you see here, we recognize, go back to the charts, the graphs that Ajit showed, and the areas of concern for the different student population groups, student experiencing homelessness, or our kindergartners, or what's going on with school climate, and student with disabilities. And so we're letting that really inform and drive the support. So Kari, can you just give you a...
Okay, so we've set up a system of supports in Connecticut to, Charlene, you caught me off guard, but to work closely with our districts, our alliance districts, our opportunity districts, those that have the highest levels of chronic absence. And we started with a sort of an informal, we call Talk Tuesdays, that happened every other week since COVID started. And that's been driven by the data and informed by the data that we see in the performance office reports that have shown us that, where the high rates of absence are with homeless youth and English learners and students with disabilities. And we've formed an in-house sort of team with our partners at CERT to sort of sift through the data, identify areas of support, which we've listed on the right here, and then our abilities to support the districts through the communities of practice. And Talk Tuesdays, we do professional webinar series. We have an adult ed, an alternative ed community of practice, because we know our attendance in those programs has even gotten worse. So we have this whole system of supporting our students through this data-informed mechanism, supporting our district.
And the one other thing I wanted to add in, Charlene, one of the questions in the chat.
Desi, you got muted.
Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Muted.
I wanted to just, there was a question in the chat, Charlene, I wanted to address about how we support our districts around this work. In Connecticut, we've tiered our districts. So we have our districts sort of in 3 buckets that we did when we wrote our ESSA plan. And what it does, it allows us to provide intensive wraparound supports as an agency to our districts that need it the most. So Charlene and I are regularly meeting with our neediest district superintendents to find out what supports do you need? What are some of the challenges that you're facing? And then we have wraparound teams at the agency that we created that work directly with our other districts that need that type of support. So that is just, I wanted to answer that question in this context. So everything that you're seeing here, we also have agency-wide wraparound supports from all of these different areas that work directly with those districts on a regular basis.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So our cross-agency work, again, sharing with you within the agency, necessary for all, special education. So all of these folks are working together to provide the supports that's needed. The last thing on this list Kari mentioned is the alternative education attendance pilot. We brought in Attendance Works to help us. We were looking at the high levels of chronic absence in the alternative programs, right? And these are the students who are most at risk, but also are in these programs because of some other issues. And we were recognizing, as we looked around the literature and practice, what do we do in these areas? And we recognized there was not a lot out there. So we actually said, here's a pilot. We're just gonna take this group and try to figure out what works, which in some cases will be direct support to kids and families, which may look a little bit different than what we do in other places and spaces as well. So we're pioneering in this area, and we'll be happy to share what we're learning there. So I hope you get a flavor of what we are doing in Connecticut. We're thrilled to be able to share what we've learned. You don't have to, we're, again, happy to share everything we're learning and setting them for you. Hopefully there's something that you've learned today that we can continue to share with you as we go forward. But thank you again. I know there's a list of resources in the next slide. So when these go out, folks can click on those. But I must say, from where I sit, I so appreciate our team here in Connecticut. My partner, Deputy Commissioner, between both of us, we've got the agency covered. I feel like the agency is surrounded in terms of the work we're doing here. And of course, Kari and Ajit and all of the folks in the agency that makes this a priority, because we've got to get kids connected and engaged in learning. For anything else that we want to do to happen for them, it is critically important. So Hedy, thank you for allowing us to take time out to work on what is our passion here and to share information with you.
truly fabulous. And can you guys stay on for 3 more minutes in case there are any other questions?
Yes.
So Chrissy had an accountability question, which is really how do you support and balance this work with accountability? And I know you said, talked a little bit about shifting it so the work that the data isn't being used for the accountability system, but this is a tough issue. Could you talk a bit more about that? And this is, oh, and she's saying accountability for students, not for districts.
This is, I think, an ongoing challenge that we cannot just flip the switch in this 1 year and change decades of culture where test scores have been misused as instruments for realtors and as instruments for ranking and sorting and shaming. You know, that's a practice that's gone on for a long time. And really, if you talk to measurement experts, they cringe at the way in which test scores have been misused. So I feel like just as this year has allowed for reset, reimagine of many things, how we structure schools, how we schedule instruction, who teaches, when, how kids engage with instruction, should they all be the same way as they always have been? I think this is also the time to ask that exact same question about how we present assessment and attendance and how we use it. We are not naive in the sense that any public reporting, and I think Desi might have referenced this before, any public reporting is accountability for the district. We totally get that. And I think we have to, for years, perhaps we have operated more in isolation with these things. And I think it is time for a reset. We are bringing a group of educators together, district and school leaders, to advise and work with us. We always have had that, but I think this year even more so in the communication and the messaging. So we have to really come through with the words that we're saying now, with our actions. We have to come through with that this year for that to really happen. So it has to be, you know, and the fact that the purpose of the assessment is to really help the kid understand and for the educator to know where the kid is. That's really the real sort of at the core. That's the purpose of the assessment. Let's see, thinking of how districts and educators.
So I wanted to clarify, I'm just going back to our original question.
Yeah,
also.
so she's asking about compulsory attendance, sort of this, you know, perfect attendance notion, right? Sort of saying like, if they're not perfect as a compliance and accountability tool for students to engage. Maybe she should explain more about what she's thinking here too. That might help.
Hi, sorry, I should have just asked the question. Thank you. Thinking about compulsory ed laws, and you know, in Washington State, there is engagement of the courts, and I assume that that's similar in many states. I don't know the context in Connecticut, and so what we see is the reliance, and we're really pushing a culture shift here in Washington, but that district and school staff and educators are really struggling with getting kids to engage. And one of the tools they want to rely on is compulsory attendance. And so just how are you messaging and balancing the need to hold students accountable, and also provide the necessary flexibility and support that students and families need?
And some of this I'm hearing, Chrissy, is about whether you're taking court solutions and taking kids to court and legal ramifications, legal approaches to making sure that kids show up versus other approaches.
Or even messaging that it's
Right.
a legal requirement, and if you don't attend, right, it's not even, we actually are taking kids to court. It's using that as a
Right.
tool.
Right.
So Chrissy, what a great question, because it allows us to talk about a partnership that we've not talked about in this space, and it's the agency's partnership with the Department of Children and Families. And initially from the onset of the pandemic, we've been jointly messaging to districts about the balance between education neglect, which is in our law, and schools reporting that, and working with families so they understand, so districts understand the challenges that families may be facing, that is even more now than ever with the pandemic. And so, Kari, I'm going to tee you up as well, but we've been regularly in the same space with our Department of Children and Families in messaging is how we work together and how districts can work together in working with families. And then we've taken it a step further, Chrissy, in the department, having webinars specifically with families. The last one was, I don't know, maybe well over 400 people, and it was around the kitchen table chat, talking to families, because we realized, I give you one story about, a student, getting up to go to class remotely, right? And that class got canceled and he went back to bed and said, I'm done for the day, right? That the parent didn't quite understand, even in that remote space, what does that look like? And so we have in some districts, behavioral health providers who are part of the team that's knocking on doors. And it's about how may we help you versus how may, not calling the authorities on you. And so how do we strike that balance? And Kari, I don't know if you want to jump in with some more specifics there, but I so appreciate that. And that's the partnership that we've forged here. So we're having that conversation clearly with districts, but also with families, and soon to be talking directly with students, so we have their voices in that space as well. Kari?
We started really early in this work over the summer with our Department of Children and Family staff, the commissioner and other staff levels. We have our the line that families call, our district call when there's issues around educational neglect. We no longer refer to the courts, and we worked with our Department of Children and Families to write our first guidance that came out just before the beginning of the school year to talk about how to support families, how to support schools, and what to do with it when you have children who are disengaged, and to take a real empathetic, almost understanding approach of what are the issues that these families are facing, and not just look at the data, but look at the situation and where are the relationships, and reminding them to try and have family meetings with the families and refer to community services, and that understanding the real definition of educational neglect and developing those relationships with their youth service bureau or their community partners to help families, and that it's not a punitive approach.
One of our first webinars, Chrissy, was with the commissioner of DCF and the deputy commissioner. And we were there with my commissioner, us as well. Hetty was on that with us. But even that shows the united front for us supporting everyone through this challenge. I hope that answers your question.
And I posted a link in the chat for that webinar, and you'll see how that we had DCF come to our Talk Tuesday, and we did a webinar, and we've had them partner with us for the messaging parts of this too.
Charlene, if I'm remembering correctly, Connecticut also has legislation that shifted away from using the courts as a solution to truancy. So they decriminalized truancy. So that was pre-COVID.
Right.
So I would say you have, so then they have to work with the Department of Children's Services. So that may also be another aspect to think about this.
Right, that's correct.
Connecticut, you all are an amazing inspiration. Thank you so much for all you do. Desi, Ajit, Charlene, Kari, we so deeply appreciate you taking the chance to share with us and continuing to do such inspirational work that helps to show all of us what's possible.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.